Every African leader in this image was eliminated by the West. I'm going to tell you why with each of their tragic stories. Pay attention.
Ha llegado la hora de la recuperación económica y
Muammar Gaddafi, the leader of Libya, is a name most people know. He was relentlessly ridiculed in Western media as a madman, despite being one of the strongest voices for Pan-Africanism in the modern era. Gaddafi envisioned an Africa united, capable of charting its own course, autonomously and independently. He advocated for a United States of Africa and invested heavily in infrastructure projects across the continent. His most ambitious project was the Dinar, a single African currency backed by gold. This was a direct threat to the Western financial system, and Gaddafi was beginning to gain serious traction, culminating in a pivotal speech he gave at the United Nations in 2009. Gaddafi's regime was undoubtedly authoritarian, and his support for global revolutionary movements isolated Libya internationally. However, he was respected across Africa and had many admirers, including Nelson Mandela, who valued Gaddafi's commitment to African unity. Mandela even named his grandchild Zondwa Gaddafi Mandela, and never believed the West should dictate who Africans should call friends or allies.
One of the mistakes which some political analysts make is to think that their enemies should be our enemies.
In 2011, during the Arab Spring, NATO intervened in Libya under the guise of protecting civilians. Gaddafi was ultimately overthrown and killed, plunging Libya into chaos. This intervention, heavily supported by the West and fueled by relentless propaganda, marked the first time social media was overtly used to sway a political agenda. Twitter and Facebook were inundated with anti-Gaddafi rhetoric, making it clear that his downfall was a coordinated effort by Western powers. The West, particularly the US, viewed Gaddafi's efforts to unify Africa and establish an independent economic bloc as a significant threat. His death was the culmination of a NATO-led military operation overseen by then US President Barack Obama, who later admitted it was the biggest mistake of his administration. Libya, once a prosperous nation under Gaddafi's rule, is now a war-torn, fractured state. The dream of African unity that Gaddafi championed was shattered, and with it, the hope for a continent free from Western domination was set back decades. Is there concrete evidence of Western involvement? You've seen the video of Hillary Clinton's gleeful reaction to Gaddafi's murder.
Yes, we came, we saw, he died.
But that is the least of it. Hillary Clinton's leaked emails between herself and former French President Sarkozy revealed the true motivations behind the intervention: securing oil contracts and reinforcing French influence in Africa. Sarkozy's emails explicitly discussed France's intent to increase its share of Libya's oil production and strengthen its geopolitical standing. Where there's smoke, there's fire. Gaddafi's elimination was not just about removing a dictator. It was about extinguishing the possibility of a united Africa, capable of challenging Western interests in the region. Sylvanus Olympio, the first president of Togo, envisioned a future where Africa would be free from colonial economic shackles. He planned to withdraw Togo from the CFA franc zone, a currency controlled by France, and establish a national currency, ensuring Togo's economic independence. The CFA franc has been a tool of neo-colonial control, allowing France to dictate the economic policies of 14 West African nations. Olympio's plan to break free from this economic stranglehold threatened French interests deeply, and just days before he could implement this revolutionary change, Olympio was assassinated in 1963. The circumstances are telling. France had a vested interest in maintaining its economic dominance in West Africa, and Olympio's assassination is widely believed to have been orchestrated with the complicity of the French government. As with any murder investigation, the question remains: who stood to gain the most from Sylvanus Olympio's death? France, and the preservation of its economic control over its former colonies. Thomas Sankara, often called Africa's Che Guevara, came to power in Burkina Faso through a coup in 1983. Like Gaddafi and Olympio, Sankara was a visionary. He implemented radical reforms, nationalizing land and mineral wealth, prioritizing education and health, and promoting women's rights. Sankara rejected foreign aid, believing it perpetuated dependence and hindered true independence. His policies were revolutionary, and his message resonated across Africa. But Sankara's bold stance made him enemies at home and abroad. In 1987, he was assassinated by his close friend and ally, Blaise Compaoré, in a coup widely believed to have been supported by former colonial powers, particularly France. Sankara's death was not just the elimination of a leader, but the silencing of a movement. His policies threatened Western economic interests and set a dangerous precedent for other African nations. His assassination ensured that Burkina Faso would not become a beacon of anti-imperialist revolution in Africa. The West's fingerprints may not be directly visible, but the consequences of Sankara's eliminations were clear. A return to a status quo that favored Western exploitation of African resources. Patrice Lumumba, the first democratically elected Prime Minister of the Democratic Republic of Congo, sought to unify and empower his nation. Congo, one of the most mineral-rich places on Earth, has long been the target of foreign exploitation. Lumumba's vision for a united, independent Congo was a direct threat to Western interests, particularly Belgium, the former colonial power. Lumumba's tenure was plagued by political instability and foreign interference. Within months of taking office in 1960, he was deposed, arrested, and eventually assassinated in a coup that was widely supported by Belgium and the United States. Declassified documents confirmed that the CIA had plotted to assassinate him, viewing his nationalist policies and alignment with the Soviet Union during the Cold War as a significant threat to Western dominance in the region. The Belgian government has also admitted its role in his murder. Lumumba's assassination marks the beginning of decades of turmoil in Congo, a nation that has never truly recovered from his loss. His commitment to genuine independence was met with brutal opposition, and his death allowed foreign powers to continue exploiting Congo's vast resources without hindrance. The West eliminated Lumumba not because he was a threat to his own people, but because he was a threat to their control. Julius Nyerere, Tanzania's first president, was not assassinated, but his vision for a self-reliant socialist Tanzania was systematically undermined by Western economic pressures. Nyerere's policies aimed at reducing inequality and promoting self-sufficiency were at odds with the interests of global financial institutions like the IMF and the World Bank. While Nyerere's leadership didn't end in a violent coup, the West used economic tools to destabilize his agenda. The imposition of structural adjustment programs weakened Tanzania's economy, forcing Nyerere to abandon many of his socialist policies. These programs were designed to keep nations like Tanzania dependent on foreign aid and subject to external influence. In essence, Nyerere's vision for a truly independent Tanzania was slowly strangled by economic manipulation, ensuring that the country remained within the West's sphere of control. Samora Machel, the first president of Mozambique, was a dedicated anti-colonial fighter and a staunch opponent of apartheid South Africa. His leadership was marked by a fierce commitment to ending colonialism in Africa and supporting liberation movements across the continent. However, in 1986, Machel's life was cut short in a mysterious plane crash near the South African border. The circumstances of Machel's death have long been shrouded in suspicion. Investigations suggest the crash was caused by a decoy beacon set up by South African forces, likely with the tacit approval of Western powers who were complicit in maintaining the apartheid regime. Machel's death dealt a significant blow to the anti-apartheid movement and ensured that regional stability remained fragile, a situation that benefited those who sought to keep Africa divided and under control. Ruben Nyobé, a dedicated anti-colonial leader from Cameroon, founded the Union of the Peoples of Cameroon, UPC, and became a leading voice for independence from French colonial rule. In 1958, Nyobe was assassinated by French colonial forces, making him a martyr for the independence movement. It was a clear message that any attempt to break free from colonial control would be met with lethal force. Félix Moumié took over leadership of the UPC after Nyobe's death and continued to fight for Cameroon's independence. However, in 1960, Moumié was poisoned in Geneva by a French secret agent named William Bechtel. His assassination further weakened the anti-colonial movement in Cameroon and ensured that the country would remain within France's sphere of influence. French involvement in Moumié's death is a documented fact, not speculation. This assassination was part of a broader strategy by France to maintain dominance over its former colonies, using any means necessary to suppress movements for true independence. Amílcar Cabral was a key figure in the independence movements of Guinea-Bissau and Cape Verde. He was a brilliant strategist and a charismatic leader whose efforts were crucial in the fight against Portuguese colonial rule. In 1973, Cabral was assassinated, a killing believed to have been orchestrated by Portuguese agents, possibly with external support. Although direct evidence linking the Portuguese government to the assassination is lacking, documents and testimonies suggest the Portuguese intelligence had infiltrated Cabral's party, the PAIGC, and were aware of the plot. Cabral's assassination came at a critical time when the PAIGC was making significant military and diplomatic gains, and his death was a strategic move to disrupt the independence movement. Hamani Diori, the first president of Niger, was overthrown in a 1974 coup that led to his imprisonment and eventual house arrest until his death. Diori had been a staunch ally of France, especially with the growing reliance on Niger's uranium exports. However, as unrest grew and Diori's effectiveness waned, France did nothing to protect him. Some analysts suggest that France allowed the coup to happen because Diori was no longer serving their interests effectively. The new regime that replaced him was more aligned with French interests, particularly regarding the exploitation of Niger's natural resources. Laurent-Désiré Kabila, who overthrew Mobutu Sese Seko in the Democratic Republic of Congo, was assassinated in 2001. Kabila's relationship with Western-backed governments in Rwanda and Uganda had deteriorated, and his desire for greater control over Congo's vast resources made him a target. Kabila's death remains shrouded in mystery, but it is widely believed that various factions supported by Western powers were involved. His assassination removed a leader who challenged Western exploitation of Congo's wealth, ensuring that the country remained in a state of turmoil, ripe for continued exploitation. Samuel Doe took power in Liberia through a coup in 1980, with strong backing from the United States. However, when Doe's authoritarian rule led to civil war, the US withdrew its support, leaving him vulnerable to his enemies. Doe was eventually captured and executed in 1990 by rebel forces. His death was a direct consequence of the US abandoning him when he was no longer useful. Eduardo Mondlane, the founder of Frelimo and leader of Mozambique's liberation struggle, was assassinated by a parcel bomb in 1969. Western intelligence agencies, particularly the CIA, are suspected of complicity in his murder, viewing him as a threat to NATO ally Portugal's control in southern Africa. Mondlane's assassination was a strategic move to prevent the realization of Mozambique's independence, which he was on the brink of achieving. His death delayed the liberation struggle, ensuring that Western interests in the region were safeguarded. Marien Ngouabi, president of the Republic of the Congo, was assassinated in 1977 amid suspicions of Western involvement. Ngouabi's death removed a leader who was steering Congo towards a socialist future, a path that was antithetical to Western interests in Africa. His assassination ensured that Congo remained aligned with Western powers rather than the Soviet bloc. William Tolbert, Liberia's 20th president, sought to move Liberia towards Pan-Africanism and reduce US influence. His independence stance and economic reforms led to his overthrow in a 1980 coup. While direct US involvement is unclear, the rapid recognition of the new regime and the lack of intervention suggest Western complicity in his downfall. Tolbert's death plunged Liberia into a cycle of instability that lasted 4 decades. Pierre Mulele, a Congolese revolutionary leader, led a Maoist-inspired rebellion against the Western-backed Mobutu regime. In 1968, he was captured, tortured, and executed, with Mobutu's regime receiving strong support from the United States. Mulele's brutal end sent a clear message to those who resisted Western influence in Africa. Resistance would not be tolerated, especially if it threatened the established order. This is a sobering list, and there are more names I didn't include.
It's easy to look at this list and try to argue about how a number of these African leaders were terminated at the hands of their fellow Africans. What strikes me most is this. Every African leader who ever stood up to the West and neocolonialism was either killed or neutralized. However, African leaders who were friends of the West have enjoyed decades of uninterrupted power and support. That is a staggering statistic and should give even the most cynical food for thought. This is one of the saddest videos I've made on my platform, but I want all of you sons and daughters of Africa to view this as an important part of our history to be learned from, so we do not make the same mistakes and we protect those that are fighting for our salvation.
If you found the information in this video useful, consider subscribing, liking, and sharing it. And make sure to sign up to my newsletter and podcast, linked in the description.